Your homeland lies thousands of miles from the wreckage of a war-torn world. While other nations work to rebuild that which has been lost, your country thrives as one of the wealthiest on earth, filled with abundant natural treasures and vast fertile fields. However, as the world enters a new and cold global conflict, you face a crossroads. What will you choose? You do not choose. You go your own way. You are Juan Perón. Welcome to Season 1 of TimeGhost Cold War coverage in our series War II War, where we cover the events of a decade after World War II that brought man from the brink of destruction to the threshold of the stars. I am Sebastian Brandstetter. So, Argentina stands as one of the wealthiest nations on Earth at the beginning of the 20th century. It has a robust agricultural economy driven by the export of wool, maize, and meat. Like Germany and France, the purchasing power is roughly $2,600. Its capital, Buenos Aires, is a thriving metropolis thanks to its large plains, British infrastructure investments, European migration, and a free economy backed by a quasi-democratic constitution. However, the widening rift between the expanding working class and the entrenched land-owning elite threatens to tear Argentina's social fabric apart. In an effort to diffuse mounting social tensions, the Sáenz-Peña Law of 1912 introduces universal male suffrage, hinting at a more democratic future. But then crisis strikes nevertheless. By the 1930s, Argentina too suffers from the effects of the world-engulfing economic crisis, the Great Depression in the infamous decade. Like in many other corners around the globe, economic turmoil creates or reopens societal rifts, and a string of unstable regimes and military takeovers are the result. 1930 sees the first successful military coup in Argentine history, when President Hipólito Yrigoyen is overthrown in a military coup led by General José Félix Uriburu. By 1943, a new military junta takes power. With it, Juan Domingo Perón's ascent begins. Starting as an aspirational military commander, Perón quickly grows into a powerful populist leader, his path to power opened by the support of large parts of the working population and trade unions. During his first term as Argentine president in 1946, he implements labor reforms, nationalizes key industries, and expands social welfare programs. Measures that deepen the allegiance of the working class, though they often provoke opposition from the Argentine bourgeoisie. He promises a new economic order focused on social justice and economic independence for Argentina. His first 5-year plan from 1946 to 1951, taken straight out of the communist playbook, is designed to attain full employment, boost national income, stabilize prices, and promote industrial development. Key initiatives included nationalizing the central bank and creating the IAPI, the Argentine Institute for Trade Promotion, which takes over control of agricultural exports to fund industrial growth. Perón even pays off Argentina's foreign debt and bought foreign-owned utilities and railways, symbolically declaring Argentina's economic independence in 1947. But there are signs of something else than freedom for the proletariat brewing within Perón's policies. He moves to centralize and control the unions to effectuate his policies and consolidate power. Thus, the CGT, the General Confederation of Labor, becomes the backbone of the Peronist movement, and new laws already in 1945 ensure that only government-approved unions can operate. This allows Perón to control collective bargaining and eliminate any unions that oppose his government. So, while Argentinian workers see real gains, such as increased wages and expanded social security benefits, these benefits come at a cost. The labor movement's independence is essentially wiped out. Perón, however, doesn't just tackle economic realities. He also completely redraws the constitutional cornerstones of the Argentine state. As the country's first directly elected president since 1928, and with a resounding majority in both chambers of Congress at his back, Perón is well positioned to implement his plan. Ultimately, Congress is reduced to a ceremonial body by 1948. His stellar rise soon emboldens the leader of Argentina beyond what most of us would consider healthy or even dignified. As he says, "I would have liked to be Perón if I had not been born Perón." Naturally, his success is not solely a byproduct of genuinely successful policies. Like any aspiring authoritarian leader, he also works hard to control public opinion. And like in Soviet Russia, Nazi Germany, or Franco's Spain, he begins by manipulating the media. By 1947, a publishing company takes over several major newspapers in Buenos Aires, consolidating media power under government control, or rather, his control. La Prensa, La Nación, and Clarín managed to stay independent, but they are the exception, not the rule. Another tried and tested strategy employed by Perón determines how he handles his political rivals: controlled opposition. To maintain the appearance of checks and balances while holding on to dictatorial power, Perón keeps institutions weak but visible. His high-profile confrontations with the openly hostile US Ambassador Braden are just one example of the facade he erects. Under the surface, for many ordinary Argentines, Perón's promises of social justice, labor empowerment, and the expansion of the welfare state ring hollow. Instead, they find themselves bearing the brunt of censorship, repression, and economic hardship. By mid-1948, cracks begin to be clearly visible. Several factors, including an inability to convert British pounds into dollars, trade imbalances, and the impact of the Marshall Plan, create serious economic issues. The problem with the British pound is especially thorny. Argentina holds 150 million in pound sterling credit from wartime exports, notably of beef, to the United Kingdom. But strict British currency controls mean these funds can only be spent in the sterling area and in pounds, not exchanged and spent in US dollars for much needed American machinery. Furthermore, Perón's commitment to social justice, particularly his policy of raising workers' wages, begins to backfire. As wage increases outpace productivity, fueling inflation and ultimately undermining exports and investment. By the early 1950s, Perón must modify his economic strategy. He dismisses Miguel Miranda, his economic advisor, and switches to a more conventional economic approach that includes austerity measures. In order to fight inflation, his new economic strategy, which is unveiled in 1952, calls for price restrictions, pay freezes, and meatless days. Despite Perón's attempts, labor unrest continues, fueled by the inflation and economic struggles. The most notable example, perhaps, is the railroad workers' strike from 1949 to 1951. In response, Perón calls in the military, effectively breaking the strike and demonstrating the extent of his power. Students, liberal Democrats, anarchists, union leaders who resist state control, or members of the outlawed Communist Party all find themselves pursued by relentless pressure and violence. Worse, the consequences of opposing Perón and his vision for Argentina are not limited to the dissenters themselves. Their families, too, become collateral damage, or even targets, serving as an example of collective punishment, yet another well-worn tool of oppression in Perón's authoritarian arsenal. My name is Tomás Rinaldi, or what is left of him. As I write this, my hands shake so badly the pencil keeps slipping. They broke 2 fingers last night. Again. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. I was a union organizer at the Fábrica Militar de Aviones in Córdoba. For years, I believed in Perón's promise, justicia social, dignity for the workers. We marched for him, thinking he's gonna save us from the oligarchs. Ah God, how naive we are. Perón's promises, bread and freedom. Yet his men torture workers while quoting Eva's speeches. Tell my wife Elena and son Pablo, age 4, I love them. Tell Argentina how Perón betrays us. His AAA death squads are the beginning of this hell. I hear boots. Tomás Rinaldi, in maybe his darkest hour, mentions Eva, a central figure in Perón's rule, for he is not acting alone. Eva, or Evita, Perón, is his wife, and is far more than a mere ceremonial first lady. She is a powerful figure in Argentine politics, shaping public opinion and influencing legislation. Together, they form a dynamic and notorious duo, often titled the Bonnie and Clyde of Argentinian politics. Evita also plays the populist doublespeak game masterfully. She has a central role in securing women's suffrage in Argentina in 1947. But by then, elections are neither free nor fair. And while the economy flounders and social justice promises are unfulfilled, she founds the Maria Eva Duarte de Perón Social Aid Foundation, later renamed the Eva Peron Foundation, in 1950, which becomes a major welfare institution. Her bond with Perón allows her to act as a bridge between him and the working class, looking like she supports their needs while also managing their expectations. In truth, she entirely supports Perón in cracking down on opponents and even urges him on, once saying, "Sometimes I wish my insults are slaps or lashes, to hit people in the face to make them see what I see." In late 1950, rumors spread that she might run for vice president. At the Cabildo Abierto gathering on August 22, 1951, she is officially nominated and gains strong support. However, she ultimately declines the nomination under military pressure and due to Perón's own political calculations. In the meantime, Evita's health has begun to decline. She has cervical cancer, something she tries to keep a secret even from her husband. But by 1951, the facade is starting to crack, and her speeches become more emotional, like in the spring of 1952, when she declares, "Even though I leave my life on the road, I will always love you, my people." Words that will later inspire the lyrics "Don't Cry for Me, Argentina" and the musical depicting her life. She dies a few weeks later, on the 26th of July 1952, and Perón, her husband, declares 30 days of national mourning, while about 3 million people attend her funeral. Her death is also a blow to Argentina's foreign relations, as Evita's popularity went far beyond the country's borders. In 1947, she embarked on her Rainbow Tour to Spain, Italy, and France, advocating for Argentina and Europe. The trip goes way beyond just publicity. It boosts her political stature. By delivering 5 million tons of food aid to Spain, she helps ease post-war starvation and enhances Franco's image, providing a propaganda win for his isolated regime. Her visit draws massive crowds, shouting "Viva Evita!" and signals international recognition when many nations are shunning Spain for its authoritarianism. Under Evita and Juan, Argentine politics are a paradoxon of the traditional far left and far right. They claim the support of the working class and unions, echoing the rhetoric of communist leaders. And under Perón, Argentina also opens formal diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union, since Argentina hadn't yet recognized the USSR since its foundation in 1922. Yet, Perón also, at the same time, organizes labor and capital into state-run economic sectors, where large businesses and companies manage industry-wide interests, mirroring the corporatist systems of Hitler's Germany and Mussolini's Italy. He also cooperates with the US to hunt down communists in South America and targets liberal Democrats at the same time. He even welcomes high-ranking Nazis and specifically Nazi scientists to Argentina, reinforcing suspicions of his fascist sympathies. This seemingly mixed messaging is not the result of a leader unsure about his ideological sympathies, but is deliberate. So, what is Perón actually doing? And what are his views towards communism and fascism? Well, according to the man himself, he's not a communist. Definitely not. Instead, he skillfully uses the rising specter of communism as a political tool, positioning himself, especially to the Americans, as the only viable alternative to a communist takeover in the region. While in Europe, he admires the organization and mobilization of the German and Italian people under Hitler and Mussolini, and he views their systems as the political wave of the future, appreciating their efficiency, noting, for example, that trains run on time. Yet later, he critiques Mussolini's major errors, but does not critique the deeper issues with Italian fascist doctrine, like absolute authoritarian rule or heavy punishments for the opponents of the regime. Also, from the 1930s, Argentine nationalism is heavily influenced by Spain and its brand of national Catholic authoritarianism. However, Franco himself privately views Perón as a weak man and considers the Spanish system a relatively benign version compared to the more brutal regimes in Italy or Germany. All of this leads to political observers and the US government often labeling Perón as a fascist or a neo-Nazi scourge, with the 1946 Blue Book describing his regime as Nazi-fascist. Despite all this, Perón constantly denies being a fascist or a Nazi. He instead insists that he only adopts ideas that might have been shared by Mussolini or Hitler. By the 1960s, he even uses the term National Socialism, but he emphasizes socialism within one country to try and differentiate it. Historians today are split into two camps, one larger, one smaller. The larger group argues that Argentina under Perón does not fit the fascist model. Instead, Perón represents some form of a populist authoritarian democracy, not a totalitarian regime. The smaller group disagrees, painting Peronism as a unique Argentine form of fascism, some even suggesting left-leaning fascism. However, there's a consensus among historians that Peronism isn't a variant of Italian-style totalitarianism, unlike Mussolini or Hitler. Perón never insists that the government is above everything and everyone all the time, everywhere at once. And he also criticizes anti-Semitism on but on practical rather than moral grounds. So do with that what you will. Instead, Perón himself describes what his ideology is as justicialismo, promoting social justice, economic independence, and political sovereignty through a strong state, organized labor, and national unity. Justicialismo, however, is just a part of his strategy. To explore, we need to shift our attention to his similarly hard to pin down economic vision. His policies borrow selectively from both capitalism and communism, while denouncing both at the same time. Rather than an economic mix and match, Perón represents his regime as something entirely new. Under the guise of national exceptionalism, his administration uses the phrase tercera posición, the third position or third way, to denounce both Soviet communism and American-style capitalism simultaneously and offer a new path. This new path, the third way, is basically Perón's foreign and economic policy, aiming to be the middle ground between communism and capitalism. He wants to offer an alternative for countries that don't want to align with either the US or the Soviet Union during the Cold War, saying, "We reject both the capitalism that exploits man and the communism that enslaves him." So, given all this, it is no surprise that Argentina's relations with the US and USSR are, well, very complicated as well. Although Argentina and the Soviet Union, as we mentioned, established diplomatic relations, Perón's rhetoric is that of a staunch anti-communist who views Marxist influence as a direct threat to his model of justicialismo, which blends nationalism, corporatism, and social welfare. Despite the Soviet Union's interest in expanding its influence into Latin America during the early Cold War, Perón maintains a wary posture toward Moscow, avoiding alignment with the Eastern Bloc. But then, in 1953, he signs the first Soviet-Latin American trade agreement ever, entering a barter-style and credit treaty with the USSR. For the Kremlin, this opens the door to South America. For the US, it is a warning shot that is well heard in Washington. And that is a problem for Perón, as the history of the Americas, and specifically of Argentina as part of the whole, is intertwined. Argentina and the United States already had a relationship and were parties to treaties prior to Perón seizing power. An important example is the Montevideo Convention on the Rights and Duties of States from 1933, which sets a foundational modern definition of statehood, what it means to be a state. It outlines the basic criteria for it: population, territory, government, and international capacity, while affirming the principles of sovereignty and non-intervention. In order to defend his dictatorial authority, Perón reinterprets the anti-imperialist spirit of the convention. For instance, he utilizes the concept of sovereignty to avoid discussing human rights violations and presents himself as a victim of foreign conspiracies. When confronted with criticism from the United States, he plays the victim card, claiming he is attacked for no reason whatsoever. His government also consistently breaks the treaty by giving money, training and asylum to populist movements in Bolivia, Uruguay and Paraguay in an effort to stir up political unrest that supports his views. He even goes further by kidnapping opponents in other South American nations, pretty much the opposite of respecting sovereignty. As a result, the relationship with the United States is a little more nuanced. Perón must strengthen ties with the US for military and economic reasons, more so than with the USSR, notwithstanding his anti-American rhetoric. As the Cold War intensifies and the United States' attention shifts to protecting its hemisphere from Soviet influence, this dynamic becomes even more crucial. This strategic concern echoes the principles of the Monroe Doctrine, which long asserted US primacy in the Western Hemisphere and opposition to external, particularly European or Soviet interference. A change in the US policy towards a more accommodative position occurs by 1947, following the resignations of anti-Perón American diplomats such as Ambassador Messersmith and Braden. The rationale is that Perón can serve as a shield against communist expansion into South America. Simultaneously, Argentina's economy becomes more and more reliant on the United States, despite prior anti-American statements and Perón's insistence on American economic independence. By 1950, American imports and investments have surpassed those of Great Britain, and Argentina, defying Perón's earlier policy of avoiding foreign loans, obtains a $125 million loan from the US Export-Import Bank. Essentially, his foreign policy is perfectly in line with his espoused third way. He cooperates with both global superpowers when necessary, even if it is just to leverage the relationship with one to gain an advantage with the other. Ultimately, he wants to stand as an equal next to Moscow and Washington. That is why Perón has big dreams for Argentina in the nuclear age. He invites Austrian scientist Ronald Richter to the country in 1948 to work on developing nuclear technology. Richter claims to have made significant breakthroughs not only in nuclear fission, but in nuclear fusion, and Perón pours substantial resources into his projects. The Austrian scientist even builds a research facility on Humelu Island, near Bariloche, but his claims lack scientific proof. In 1951, he announces to the world success in controlled nuclear fusion, and Perón proudly shares the news. However, rather quickly, by 1952, the project is exposed as a failure, or should I say a scam, and the site is shut down. Despite this, Argentina continues to invest in nuclear research, emerging as a regional leader in the field. Ultimately, Perón's dreams end on the 19th of September 1955, at least for a moment. Something tells me he will be back. In any case, on that day, faced with popular revolt supported by the military, born from his violent repression, authoritarian policies and economic mismanagement, he resigns and goes into exile. As this chapter in Argentina's history closes, we see a nation torn between dreams of progress and the weight of authoritarian rule. Perón's pursuit of social justice and national independence comes at a heavy cost, marked by manipulation, coercion, and lasting trauma for the Argentine people. Argentina serves as a valuable example, illustrating that choosing to reject both the USSR and the US is difficult, if not entirely impossible, in an age where the globe is carved up into spheres of influence. The third way did not prove strong enough to stand alongside the other two dominant ways of the age. Yet, the idea doesn't end with Perón's first reign. By the 1960s, something similar is born, at least insofar as it wants to stand separate from both the US and the USSR. The non-aligned movement officially comes into being. Will it be able to withstand where Perón and Argentina could not? Only time will tell. To find out where the non-aligned movement, or NAM in short, is headed, stay tuned here on TimeGhost and discover how the Cold War shaped our world today. If you want to know more about how Nazi scientists came to Argentina, the why, the when, then check out our Spies and Tie videos about the red lines, where Anna and Astra do a fantastic job explaining all of that. Peron and Evita also feature prominently there. It is only because of the TimeGhost army that we here at TimeGhost are capable of shining light onto some of the most defining moments of history. To become part of the mission, head over to timeghost.tv or patreon.com. See you next time. Excelsior!